What up, y'all? Uncle Shady at the mic. Uh, so over the years, um, going through everything I went through back in the day, and over the years, I'd make joke, I started seeing kids, I started that whole, started the hipster thing, like I started that back in the day, and like people would always like laugh and roll their eyes or something, and I never really had something to point at that was very solid, that explained everything that happened back in the day, until Finn McKenty came around, um, and he did a video that I reviewed. It's on my channel about crunkcore, and he basically pointed at Hollywood Undead as being one of the originators of this sound that ended up going mainstream, and several bands, several artists, got big, off the coattails of what we did back in the day, back in MySpace days. So anyway, yeah, you should check out that video. It's pretty good. But he's done 2 more videos that we're gonna watch today, and I'm just gonna comment on him. But Finn's a pretty cool dude. He's around my age. He was around, he was a little younger than me back in the day, but he definitely saw enough to be honest about what happened. And it's funny that it's cool of him to cover all that stuff as much as he does, because it's like kind of like the most hated music of all time, in a way. But yeah, so we're gonna watch this. This one's called "The Rise and Fall of Scene Kids."
What's up, everybody? I'm Finn McKenty. This is the Punk Rock MBA, and I'd like to ask you to turn back the clock to 2008, when kids looked like this and bands sounded like this. This is the time to let yourself go.
I don't remember anything.
Or this. That's right, I am talking about Scene Kids and the soundtrack to their existence, Scene Music. Easily one of the most bizarre moments in the history of alternative culture, but honestly, also kind of cool in hindsight. Scene Kids were obviously pretty ridiculous, but at the same time, I always also appreciated how their music was just like wildly experimental. The Scene Kids broke all the supposed rules of music because they didn't even know or care that those rules existed. Yes, obviously they were cringe, but they also pioneered the way we use social media. Scene music was very influential to some of today's biggest stars like Lil Uzi Vert and Post Malone. And believe it or not, the scene aesthetic is kind of coming back. So where exactly did scene culture come from, and why did it die? And was it really as bad as everybody said at the time? And most importantly, what is scene culture's lasting influence and impact? Those are the questions that I will answer in this video.
Interesting.
NFL season is officially here, and that is a very good thing, because NFL football is the best sport on the planet. Don't be... I first remember hearing people talk about Scene Kids on my favorite metal forum somewhere around, I think, 2005, when metalheads started to complain about these kids with their straightened hair and stretched ears invading the metal.
So 2005, let's talk about that timeline. So I grew up in the hardcore scene in the 90s, mid to late 90s. And that's kind of, there were several costume changes during those years. When I first got in the scene, everybody was wearing huge jeans and huge t-shirts. It was kind of like a 90s skate hip hop kind of almost look. Big jeans, big pants. Then it went like kind of GQ kind of hip hop for a while. And then it went greaser for a while, and then it went like high fashion, like strange. And that was mainly influenced Justin Pearson and James Hart from 18 Visions. He was a Vidal Sassoon hairstylist, and he would always have the craziest hairstyles. And in California, 18 Visions, that's one of the California's best bands. Definitely their early stuff was some of the most fun I ever had in my life. Going to those shows and stuff back in the day. They were all dudes I grew up with in Orange County. My first band I was ever in was called Driven. It was with Brandon Chapetti that ended up being in 18 Visions and Bleeding Through and Throwdown and all those bands. So the scene hair, man, shit. I need to pull up a picture of my hair, babe. Damn. So, yeah, I need to find pictures. You guys have them. You've seen them. I had some pretty crazy scene hair. Evan Thomas 750, who was my best friend during all that, he had next level crazy scene hair. But that whole aesthetic was Justin from the Locust and James Hart, and that influenced the whole hardcore scene countrywide, basically during that time, 98, 99, 2000. So 2005, this is basically, I had moved to LA and I had gone to Japan, and I got back, and it was about the time Hollywood Undead started, I believe. But that was like, I was bringing over the whole scene thing from the hardcore scene that I grew up in Northern California and Southern California. And when I started Hollywood Undead, that was definitely the aesthetic that we were running with, which was like, the whole big hair and the big spiky flat ironed hair and the distressed jeans and the vegan sambas and like hoodies and rip, sleeveless t-shirts, all that, the big hair. That was the metalcore scene, hardcore scene in the late 90s. That kind of sprouted that whole look, basically. So by 2005, that look was already old. That look had already been done for quite a while before it hit the mainstream, which I think is what we're going to see here.
The metal scene, as bands like Job for a Cowboy started blowing up on MySpace.
So yeah, so the hardcore scene has certain type of dancing that started in the New York hardcore scene in the early 90s and possibly even late 80s. DC, New York scene, it's moshing, but it's a lot more violent. It's almost choreographed. I mean, it is choreographed, really. It's very interesting and tribalistic looking thing to experience going to a hardcore show and watching everyone stage dive, hardcore dance, sing along, pile up, the singer come out and give up the mic, and like 30 kids would pile on top of each other. Like, really fun stuff back in the day. And I'm not surprised that this stuff is getting big now. Again, there's this throwback to the 90s hardcore that's going on right now with lots of cool bands like Drain and Turnstile and who else? What other big bands? Yeah, so anyway. Yeah, these kids are hardcore dancing. I bless their little souls.
And I was in my mid-20s at the time, so they kind of caught me by surprise. I had no idea where these kids came from or why they look like this.
I was in my 30s. I think
but I pulled
was 30.
My detective hat on, and over time, the pieces started to fall into place. The way I see it, the roots of Scene Kids go way back to the mid-90s emo scene, specifically one man from San Diego named Justin Pearson.
I just like fucking with people.
He was in a few bands like Struggle, Swing.
Justin's bands played in my living room in Santa Cruz. I used to do shows in Santa Cruz, house shows and venue shows hardcore shows. But Justin's band, The Locust, before they got huge, they used to come and play at my house. Justin's first band, Struggle, here is a really good band. He's in a band called Swing Kids. It's really good. Dude's in like 1,000 really good bands. What's his band now called? They're playing with Converge. Oh, I can't think of it right. Yeah. But Justin's dope. Very nice guy. Every year of my life since I met him, he's told me happy birthday on my birthday, which is always something that's, you know, it's pretty cute. He's a nice guy.
Swing Kids, and most notably The Locust. And he was the person to bring tight
If
pants.
you haven't seen The Locust before, holy crap. I might have to do a video on The Locust. The Locust is a pretty awesome band. They dressed like bugs. They played basically kind of like, I guess, I mean, it was called, I called it screamo, but it was called like kind of power violence, or what would you call Locust was kind of power violence. Sounds almost like death metal, but like not quite as loud, or not loud. Jesus, like just noisy. Yeah, noise core. I think I've heard it called, but they're a very interesting band. They have a small CD that they put out once. That album is unbelievably good.
Pants and big teased out hair.
Definitely check out The Locust. They're a cool band.
Into hardcore. You may know him from his random appearance on Jerry Springer back in the day.
Justin, what's going on?
See,
Well,
see,
you know,
this is who originated all of this hair stuff. So that hairstyle, that band, that dude in San Diego. It's pretty wild. Like, and this was common knowledge back in the day. Like, we knew where that look came from. We knew who we were copying. You know, we were copying Justin and James, and those two dudes were very like highly looked at dudes in the scene. Lots of bands over the years. But the Southern California started this whole thing that to this day is still worldwide, like going stronger than ever, which is wild.
I'm into rock and roll, and I live the rock and roll lifestyle.
This was a character he was playing. This is Justin's the sweetest, nicest dude, but he you could basically anyone could get on Jerry Springer back in the day if you were willing to say some crazy shit. I've had several friends go on Jerry Springer. Mike Franklin was on. Oh boy.
And stuff happens, you know, and
But how did we get from The Locust to Metro Station? Well, Justin Pearson was copied by Refused, who were in turn copied by bands like Norma Jean and Under Oath, whose CDs were sold in Christian bookstores. And a few years later, 18 Visions and Atreyu, who were the creators of what they called fashion core at the time, or hardcore kids basically dressed like they were extras in a Buck Cherry or Saliva video. And because both of those bands got quite a bit of airplay on MTV.
Yeah, so those two dudes, I mean, this is like this is late era James Hart here. This is like they were all in their 30s but at this point, but when we were kids, like you know, this this does look very Buck Cherry-ish, but they eventually got very popular. 18 Visions. This dude used to be in Throwdown. He used to be the singer of Throwdown, and they were a really good band during that era. Anyway, so yeah, James and Justin started that whole look. The Orange County, the bleach stain, the colored bleach stain. Holy crap! You used to go to hardcore shows, and that's all it would be. It's just bleach stained, black hair with bleach stains and different colored bleach stains. And that actually, I feel like that had a little bit to do with the rockabilly scene. Because in Orange County, Costa Mesa, there was like a lot of like greaser, like psychobilly scene there. And I think they kind of stole that because they were doing that back in the day. The girls with the little Betty, you know, like the little boopsy psychobilly girls. Yeah. So yeah,
Extras in a Buck Cherry or
Visions, another very good band. Their early stuff. Their first, I mean, up until they got mainstream, all those albums are bangers, but their early stuff is really, really heavy, really good stuff. Some of my favorite hardcore early, it's like my favorite of all my friends' bands. 18 was sick. I did many shows with them in Santa Cruz at the Vets Hall basement. Crazy shows.
or Saliva video.
Orange County Kids go hard.
And because both of those bands got quite a bit of airplay on MTV's rebooted Headbangers Ball, that look sort of spread from the hardcore scene out into the suburbs. And that is my emo lab leak theory about how we got from 90s basement hardcore shows
completely accurate
to suburban teenagers with RAR XD dinosaur shirts and Job for a Cowboy in their MySpace top 8, aka Scene Kids. Which brings us to the glory days of Scene Kids in the mid to late 2000s. And again, I was in my mid 20s by the time Scene Kids came along, and so my perspective on all of this is from somebody who was sort of a little bit older and watching it happen from the outside. Unlike Brian Stars, I did not have a scene phase at the age of 25. And one thing I want to point out is that scene is really an aesthetic, not a style of music. But this is a music channel, and the whole scene thing was very tightly connected to music. So I'm going to look at it from that angle. And the way I see it, there are basically 3 different branches of scene music. The first branch is crunkcore, which basically is Scene Kids doing their version of mainstream party rap. The biggest band in this genre, and in my opinion, the really definitive example of an early scene band is Hollywood Undead. For example, this song from 2005, which is called Scene for Dummies.
So, then to immediately jump from The Locust and 18 Visions for him to immediately jump to Hollywood Undead, like, that was me. No one in HU listened to any of those bands. They didn't know those guys. They weren't in that scene. That was my scene. So for Finn to do this, he really knew he really paid attention and has really done his homework. He just doesn't know where Hollywood, I don't think he necessarily cares or knows how Hollywood Undead popped up and how, my involvement. But dude knows what's up. Wow.
There was also Broken Side from Albuquerque. You probably remember how their song Freaks was viral for literally months.
Oh God, this song. Do you remember when this came out, babe? The Broken Side, this.
And of course, Millionaires, 3 teenage girls from Orange County who did this sort of deliberately obnoxious party girl music. Give me that alcohol. And if you were on the internet back then, you will remember that people just absolutely hated this stuff. Yeah. I don't think I've seen anything more hated before or since. Yeah. When Broken Side came out, for example, every insufferable hipster blog was writing their version of the same article.
Absolute facts there. I remember when that shit came out, every fucking music writer, Vice magazine, every freaking music outlet was like, this is the worst band, it's the worst music in the world. It was so funny, and it was such a big troll. Michael, those dudes, the Broken Side dudes, I used to hang out with them a bunch. They're hilarious, but they just trolled the living shit out of the entire industry. It was amazing. Amazing.
Article, some variation on, oh my God, we found the worst song ever recorded. And to give you an idea of how much people hated this stuff, even in the alternative scene, I remember back then pitching the editor of Alternative Press on a story about Broken Side, and his reply was,
almost did a song together. I remember they sent it to me. And then I think no. Yeah, I had it in my email. Yeah, I found it in my email recently. The song that we were supposed to work on.
Was, fuck no, I'd rather get finger banged by an arthritic witch than have that band in my magazine. And it might be tempting to say that people hated it just because the music was bad. But I don't think it's that simple, because there's lots of bad music out there. Why did they get so angry at these bands?
And by the way, fucking belt buckle.
I think all 3 of them were actually pretty cool. I think if you dig a little bit deeper, the actual reason behind the backlash is pretty interesting. Like I said before, crunkcore was basically the scene kid version of mainstream party rap, like say Lil Jon or Yin Yang Twins. Their songs were pretty much all about getting wasted, partying, and fucking. But not in the old school Motley Crue or Pantera kind of way, really more of a hip hop inspired sort of way. If those old school bands were like stepping into some grimy, filthy dive bar with Motorhead playing on the jukebox and ordering a round of Jaeger shots, Hollywood Undead and Millionaires, well, they were more like going to a hip hop club and doing blow with strippers. And so really what I think it comes down to is a clash of culture. All these crunkcore bands were drawing from a set of influences that really just weren't accepted. It sounds kind of absurd to say that people were mad at these bands because they weren't partying in the acceptable way, but I kind of think that's what it was. But there weren't really that many crunkcore bands. Probably the biggest branch of scene music was all the metalcore and deathcore bands that started popping up in the mid-2000s. And I think the first one of those bands, the first like really heavy scene band to come out was Job for a Cowboy, who were really just a bunch of teenagers from Arizona when they dropped their debut, the Doom EP. This song very quickly blew up on MySpace and basically put the entire genre of deathcore on the map overnight. All of a sudden, there were kids everywhere with stretched ears, straightened hair, and extremely skinny jeans playing as many breakdowns as humanly possible. And around the same time, Suicide Silence were coming up in Southern California, Bring Me the Horizon was coming up in the UK, and there were all the metalcore bands like Asking Alexandria, The Devil Wears Prada, and of course, the OGs Attack Attack. And just like with the crunkcore bands, the metal establishment absolutely hated this stuff. They called it gay. They said it was all just a bunch of generic breakdowns. They gave it just zero credit. And again, part of that was because of the music, but more than anything, I think it was because these bands just challenged the conventions. The guys in these bands looked more like your sort of average Zoomies, PacSun, skater, hardcore kind of kid than your typical Megadeth fan. They played breakdowns more than solos. And of course, we have to talk about the merch. This was the golden era of what I like to call neon cartoon monster merch, when an absolutely filthy, ridiculously brutal band like Suicide Silence might have shirts with like a neon cartoon shark on it, which I think pissed off a lot of the old school metal fans because in their eyes, well, you can't have bright colors. Like that's not metal. You have to wear the metal uniform if you want their approval, which really highlights what made scene culture so interesting to me. Scene kids broke all the so-called rules because those kids didn't know and didn't care what the rules even were. Like the scene aesthetic was this kind of insane mashup of like anime, rave, and punk with maybe like a dash of hip hop. Like you could see a kid with this insane colored hair that's teased out like some 80s anime character, wearing a bunch of candy necklaces and bracelets like a raver, but also wearing a metal shirt and maybe a new era snapback. And the music was just as wild. Bands were playing like melodic death metal riffs with EDM parts like Attack Attack and Asking Alexandria. Deathcore bands were wearing grills in their videos like it's Paul Wall. Warped Tour kids were rapping. Like the whole thing just felt like a fever dream. And I think all that happened because it was this very particular moment in time. Yep. On the one hand, it was the first time that kids had access to basically every obscure facet of pop culture thanks to the internet. They could listen to every song, watch every anime, play every game, and remix all of that into something new, which was basically scene culture. And on the other hand, because this was all happening on MySpace, the gatekeepers who usually try to enforce their rules kind of didn't know what was happening. And so the scene kids basically had free reign to do whatever they wanted, like mom and dad leaving you alone for the weekend with pizza money. Which brings me to the last branch of scene music that I don't think really has a name, but I've always called it neon pop punk because it kind of takes the blueprint of what bands like Blink, Sum 41, and Good Charlotte were doing in the early 2000s, but making it even more accessible and pop and putting a giant coat of neon paint all over it. And the biggest name in this subgenre would be Metro Station, which was fronted by Miley Cyrus's brother Trace, along with Mason Musso, whose older brother was on Hannah Montana along with Miley. And I mention all of that because this was like literally Disney punk. And if you were alive in 2008, then you almost definitely heard their big single, Shake It. Shake, 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 yeah. Shake, 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 yeah. There was also Cash Cash, who these days are known as big-time EDM DJs, but started out doing, well, this. As well as bands like All Time Low, Boys Like Girls, The Main, and like literally hundreds of random obscure local bands trying to chase after their success. But my personal favorite band in the genre is Forever the Sickest Kids, especially their first album, Underdog Alma Mater, which is a masterpiece of, I guess for lack of a better word, progressive pop punk. And neon pop punk was a very interesting little subgenre because it was basically what everybody accused Blink of being 10 years earlier. These were like very manufactured, major label boy bands that played a Disney-fied version of pop punk for an audience of mostly like literally 6th grade girls. And to be clear, there's absolutely nothing wrong with any of that, but that does bring up another very interesting aspect of scene culture, which is that it was very heavily female dominated. There were definitely male scene kids, but when you look at who really influenced the direction of the culture, it was girls. For example, one of the things I noticed with the metalcore and deathcore scene bands is that there were way more girls into that stuff than was ever the case with the previous generation of metal. For example, I remember walking past the line for an Asking Alexandria show in LA in probably 2010, and it was like 70%
girls. Probably definitely pushed that look to the extreme far more than most of the dudes, I think. Well, there was some goofy
girls. And if you look at the history of pop culture in general, what you'll notice is that typically things where the primary audience is young women are almost never respected by the media and gatekeeper types. Whether that's the early days of the Beatles, or Fall Out Boy, or Twilight, or Riverdale, or K-pop, or Hot Topic, if the primary fan base for anything is young girls, it tends to get written off as trendy garbage, while the boys' version of the same thing gets a lot more respect. For example, look at Barbie versus G.I. Joe. And I think that dynamic explained a lot of the overall hate for scene culture in general. Like, take a band like Suicide Silence, who objectively are as heavy as it gets. Metal fans should love them, right? I mean, they sound a lot more like Cannibal Corpse than they do Metro Station. But if you were around back when they came out, you will remember how much metal fans just absolutely hated them. I remember they called them Scenecide Silence. Yeah. And is it a coincidence that a lot of girls also liked the band? I don't know. You tell me. In any case, nothing as trendy as scene culture can last forever, and it definitely did not. The exact date that scene kids went extinct depends on how old you are and where you lived. But from what I saw, the real cracks started to appear maybe around 2010 or so. By that point, MySpace was dead, which was really the beating heart of scene culture. And the original crop of scene kids had grown out of their scene phase. Usually they turned into hipsters, DJs, or hardcore kids who tried their very best to completely eliminate all traces of their embarrassing past as a scene kid. But to me, what really seemed like the final nail in the coffin of scene kids was when the website isanyoneup.com went down in 2012. For anybody who may not have seen it, it was a site run by a guy named Hunter Moore who would post revenge porn of popular scene bands like A Day to Remember, as well as just random scene kids. People would send their nudes in and he would post them. Yes, it was incredibly fucked up, but the site was also incredibly popular. Everybody at the time obviously knew that it was wrong, but everybody was looking at it and it was a constant topic of discussion. Like, oh my God, did you see who's on Is Anyone Up today? To make
he actually got a church group paid him to shut the website down and to release a statement about it being bad. He had several indictments at the time, so I think he was like, I should probably stop doing this. And I think he got like several $1 million for the website. But then I think he eventually got thrown in jail, and then I think that money had to go towards victims or something, because he lost a bunch of this stuff. But yeah, this guy's a scumbag.
To make a long story short,
he came to Hollywood, and he came to Moscow or something, and he got his ass beat.
Police got involved, and when Hunter Moore eventually went to prison, and for good reason, to me it really felt like just closing the door on that whole era. Most of the scene bands either broke up, changed their sound, or at least stopped wearing neon. Tumblr and Facebook took the place of MySpace, and the next generation of bands was almost like the exact opposite of the scene bands. There was all the gent bands like Born of Osiris and Periphery that were sort of drawing from Meshuggah and the world of progressive metal, or bands like The Story So Far and La Dispute that drew more from hardcore and indie and quote-unquote real emo aesthetics and imagery, with a lot of gritty imagery and desaturated colors, in contrast to the animal print and neon cartoon monsters of the scene era. Which brings us to the big question: what is the lasting impact and influence of scene culture? My overall take is that obviously scene kids were very cringe in a lot of ways, but I think they also deserve a lot of credit for pioneering a lot of things that we now take for granted. For one, the way that they used MySpace was really the blueprint for how bands and creators use social media to this day. Job for a Cowboy was the first metal band that I remember blowing up based purely on MySpace. Owl City also got signed to a major label
like
before he
SpongeBob SquarePants video too. It was crazy. Like,
even played a single show because of his MySpace. Hollywood Undead are another example of that. They were actually the first band signed to MySpace Records. And when you look at people like Melissa Green from Millionaires and the other so-called scene queens like Audrey Kitching and Hannah Beth, those girls were 100% the template for what we now call influencers. These were just normal teenagers who built an audience for themselves using the computer.
But they're called MySpace celebrities back in the day.
Computers in their bedrooms and turned that into a career for themselves. Jeffree Star is another MySpace scene kid who turned that into a multi-million-dollar empire for himself. So basically what I'm saying is the Millionaires to Jake Paul pipeline is real. It was also the first genre of music that was really internet first. This didn't really click to me until I actually went to see some of these bands that had like millions of plays on MySpace, but literally like 50 or 75 people would be at one of their shows. And at first that didn't make sense to me because I thought, how could these bands be so big on MySpace, but nobody's coming to see them? But then I realized, well, of course, 90% of their fans are kids that can't go to a show because they're either too young, live too far away, or they're just too shy to handle being in a room with that many people that they don't know. And so you put all that together, and it was really the precursor to the SoundCloud, emo rap, and hyperpop scenes that would come a decade later. It was the internet kids making music for other internet kids that built up millions and millions of fans before the rest of the music industry even knew that it was happening. And so you kind of wonder, would there be a Lil Peep, XXXTentacion, or Suicide Boys without Hollywood Undead and Ask Alexandria? Maybe, but maybe not. And although at the time, scene kids were easily the most hated alternative subculture that I've ever seen before or since, I think now people are starting to look back on it a little differently. Rappers like Lil Yachty have talked about being influenced by scene bands. Lil Uzi Vert just dropped 2 songs with Bring Me the Horizon. And Post Malone's high school band even covered Ask Alexandria. And if you look on TikTok, I never thought I would see this, but there's a whole wave of kids who were like barely alive when scene kids were even a thing, bringing back that 2008 aesthetic. Pop culture tends to run on 20-year cycles, which means, you guessed it, we are due for a full-on scene revival in maybe another 2 years. So my advice is get your hair straightener and neon skinny jeans now because you're going to need them. All right, my friends, that does it for this video. As always, let me know what you think in the comments. And I would like to thank everyone who supported.
Well, that was cool. I think that would be pretty accurate. And then there's this other one.
The weird world of scene music. The other day we went down the nu metal iceberg, and I think we learned a lot from that. I think we all grew together. And today we're going to go down the scene music iceberg because, you know, the thing with the scene music, when I say scene music, I mean all the MySpace stuff from whatever, 2007 to 2010-ish, something like that. It was weird. It was really, really, really weird. And it's so strange that in hindsight, I don't know, we all just treated this stuff
I would say it started in 2004, really, a little bit earlier. Because Warped Tour 2005, I was with From First to Last on Warped Tour in 2005, and that shit was popping already because Sonny had the, you know, like everyone, all the kids had that aesthetic back then, the emo, spiky haired emo thing, like it was normal, and it was definitely not normal. 2007 would be like when it was started ending, probably. The more distance we get from like the scene era, the more I just kind of scratch my head. I'm like, what was going on? It's like we can edit this like I'm having a conversation with them. Fever dream. It was weird. It was weird. So today we will go down the scene music iceberg. We'll try to figure out what the hell was going on. Why was this a thing? What is going on? What were we thinking? I'll start by breaking it down into categories. This video is sponsored by the metalcore band Gold Souls. Let's check out Gold Souls. This is Walk the Other Way featuring Ryo Kinoshita, formerly of Crystal Lake. Hardcore bands and Asian kids. Remember, didn't we talk about that? Oh, he's not Asian. He's Ryo.
And this one is called Eyes on Fire. To me, is crabcore, which, of course, as we all know, was based on this iconic moment from the Attack video for Stick Stickly. I guess people thought that they looked like crabs here because of their stance. They called it crabcore. And then because Attack blew up off of this video, then there were like literally hundreds, if not thousands of bands all over the world imitating Attack and Asking Alexandria and all these other bands. It was like a cottage industry, like a whole genre of music of like all these bands from like Russia and Brazil and literally everywhere all over the world trying to become the next Attack and Asking Alexandria and become the next like MySpace scene heartthrobs. And some of them were pretty good, but most of them not good. I thought crabcore was coined by metal trolls back in the day. It was, but then Attack, they're smart. So they said, you know what? We're going to own this shit. Yeah. And they started making crabcore shirts. I remember I saw them on Warped Tour like 2010, I think. And they had shirts that said Columbus Crabcore. Good move. You guys know all about Attack and the Devil Wears Prada and Asking Alexandria. You guys know all about that stuff. So what we're here to do is go down the iceberg. That's what we're here to do. Talk about some of the stuff hidden below the surface. All those bands that I talked about that popped up all over the world that wanted to imitate the good ones. I think maybe one of my favorites is Capture the Crown, which was basically the Australian knockoff of Asking Alexandria, but much worse. Just like checking every single box. We've got the ripped jeans, the deep V's, we've got the crab coring in an abandoned warehouse, even copying like Danny Warstop's like hand movements, just copying
super fresh tattoos, super fresh full sleeves. Like everyone's tattoos are brand new because they just got them all at once. None of the clothes are actually distressed; they're just chopped up.
Copy and paste Asking Alexandria. I like this part here. So, of course, one of the most important parts of any metalcore video, you got to have rain, right? You have to. You got to have rain, ideally on like the drummer's cymbals. So he hits the snare drum, goes psh, in slow motion, shows the rain splashing off the drums in a cool way. Well, these guys, I guess down in Australia, they don't have rain machines or something. So they just had like one of their friends with a hose outside the frame of the video here. Just spritz me with a hose, mate. Just spray me with a hose. The other thing that I like these bands would do is they had the ego riser, which was, when they would start having the little shelf on the stage that the singer would stand on during the cool chorus parts. Well, again, I guess down in Australia, they didn't have ego risers. They couldn't afford that. So he's just got this like rusty paint can that he's putting his foot on. I like it. Hey, listen, you guys might laugh. I respect the ingenuity. Necessity is the mother of invention. Just, hey, mate, give me that paint can from the corner. How does it feel, bitch? Oof, these vocals. He sounds like Marge Simpson. Oh, this is my favorite. I swear to God, mate. I swear to God, mate. This is a nice little detail here that I never noticed before. Funny. On his Epiphone Les Paul here, he just took duct tape and made it say fuck. If I was his mom, I would say his name is probably Calum or something like that, something Australian. I'd say, Calum, why did you have to put the F word on your guitar in the video? I'm disappointed. So edgy.
Yeah, how fresh those tattoos are.
Yeah, we don't use potty words. Getting down the iceberg, some proper Australian budget crabcore. Another one of these weird kind of discount Asking Alexandria cover bands from scattered across the world. This was one of them. Make Me Famous. This is Dennis Stoff, his old band. He went on to be in Asking Alexandria for, I don't know, a year or something like that.
Never
Song
heard
is
of
called
that.
Blind Date 101. Some real like
so. I mean, I
budget
know if I heard a
crabcore.
song
That's
there,
what I like to call it.
pop
Budget crabcore, you know, like the wish.com crabcore. Warning, this
They're
video
like
will make you feel awkward,
emo or
uncomfortable, and leave you asking yourself, what the fuck did I just watch? It will, but not for the reasons that they intended. Oh, the drummer for this band was in Rose's funeral. I did not know that. That's right, and this song is basically a mashup of 4 other different metalcore songs. Pierce the Veil, Asking Alexandria, 2 different Asking Alexandria songs. It's a good-looking guy, that's for sure. Oh, wait a minute. They had her eating a banana. I'm not very good at like symbolism, but I feel like when she held up that banana and put it in her mouth, I feel like it was supposed to be symbolizing something else. And I'm not quite connecting the dots, but I feel like there's something there. Potassium deficiency, that's probably what it was. This is like actually apart from an Attack Attack song right here. This is apart from Stick Stickly right here. Just slightly different rhythm. Oh, see, I like that. She didn't eat the banana in a sexy way. She just bit the fucking tip off. I like it. There we go. That's my kind of girl. Bite the whole fucking thing off, mash it up in your mouth. That's what I'm after. Here we go. That's how you know. That's how you know they're from Ukraine. This is like the Ukrainian baddie that works at the BB store at the mall. You see her walking around like this in the food court, and you're like, hey now. Who's that? She bad. Here we go. This is terrible.
Wow, this feels like...
They're trying so hard to be Asking Alexandria, trying so hard to be the rock and roll bad boys.
So
yeah, not good. But we're getting further down the iceberg, people. There's millions of more. I mean, if you want to talk about Casino Madrid, if you want to get really, really further down the iceberg, we could go on forever with the crabcore stuff, but I think you get the idea. I would say probably like one of the last examples of a band to really come out of nowhere. You'll remember the classic moment that Design the Skyline was signed to Victory Records. You remember this? When Victory Records announced that they had signed Design the Skyline, and this is when Victory was still considered like a prestigious label, you know, because this was what, a year or so after like A Day to Remember blew up, when Victory was like really still on their shit. They said, hey, here's the next big thing. And it was Design the Skyline. OG meme core, it's true.
OG meme.
Back then, this band is what I thought most scene music sounded like, but they're actually kind of good. Like, this is...
What was this band called, Tommy?
Me when I was like 16 years old and said, hey, try to sound like Dillinger Escape Plan. This is what I would do. This is what it would sound like. This is like every genre of scene music playing at the same time.
Oh
and they
my
look like
God.
Elves.
Holy crap. All the keyboards are getting destroyed.
Imagine pressing play on a Scene Kid's iPod on every song at the same time. It would be this. I feel like a lot of people also made fun of the fact that they had like those neon green strings on the guitars, which I don't know. I think those look kind of cool. They sound bad, but they look kind of cool. I don't know why the neon strings on the guitars were considered so offensive to people, but they didn't like it.
I like that. They look like Dayglow.
This part's kind of cool, actually. This is honestly aged horribly or brilliantly. You can look at it as a dated relic from the past or a hilarious piece of avant-garde surrealism. Exactly. Exactly. Why not both? It's like Schrodinger's scene band. I just want to know what made Victory Records see and hear this. And they're like, yeah, sign it.
Wild.
Exactly.
That is wild.
Cargo shorts.
Records.
Everyone who hates this would love it. I think that's right. So there we go.
Victory
We've gone
Records
further
was
down.
like the biggest hardcore label when I was growing up. they were like a corporate hardcore label. And Earth Crisis, it was all like these vegan straight edge bands and shit.
The Iceberg, but we're not done yet, because the next part of the scene,
Okay, Strife, Earth Crisis.
Iceberg, is of course crunkcore. You guys are familiar with it from Broken Side, of course. Everyone remembers Broken Side. We all remember this. This song and this video have been discussed on the internet to death. There's nothing that I have to add about Broken Side other than to say, put some respect on their name. 15 years later, I think we all know this was a classic, but the genre of crunkcore goes much, much deeper than just Broken Side, people. This is the very, very beginning. This is just the very tip of the crunkcore iceberg. It goes much deeper than this. For example, you may remember Breathe Carolina. This is like the weird, like, version of Cobra Starship minus the irony. Like, Cobra Starship was sort of deliberately douchey and bad, and Breathe Carolina was like, yeah, let's do that. About crunkcore, especially like this version of it, is that they partied. Unlike most bands in sort of the scene, these people actually seemed like kind of cool and attractive, and they partied. You know, this wasn't just like a bunch of metal nerds like sweating over their guitars. These guys like partied and they hung out with like hot girls and stuff. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. Women in a video? What? I've heard of this. I understand that women exist, but they don't typically overlap. The Venn diagram of like attractive women and alternative music, like, rarely overlaps. Maybe they just touch a little bit here and there, but with this stuff,
yeah, that sounds like a hardcore band.
They look like they partied with.
Maybe we should look up their music.
Strippers and stuff. Terrible. Terrible, terrible, terrible. Very advanced, but it was terrible. Yes, these are the guys who could party with the cool kids despite being in the scene with the kids who didn't fit in. And as you may know, they went on to become like big time Vegas EDM dudes, and one of them is getting investigated by the SEC now for promoting some NFT. Never thought you would see this, but Tom Cooperman from Breathe Carolina indicted by the SEC for pumping and dumping stocks on Twitter and Discord. So if you ever thought that you would see Breathe Carolina appearing in an SEC filing, well, today your prediction came true. Who would have ever thought that? Breathe Carolina prosecuted for securities fraud. What a time to be alive. They went from partying with these like Hollywood strippers to getting indicted by the SEC. That was not on my bingo card either, but it goes much deeper than that. If you want to get into like some real shit tier crunkcore, we got to talk about Curve from Evansville, Indiana. There was like a whole scene of this stuff in Evansville. Curve and Dropping a Popped Locket and Scene Kids. And I want to say there was one other group, but like Evansville, Indiana is like a small college town in the middle of nowhere in Indiana. And I don't know, I have no idea how this became a thing, that there was like a crunkcore scene in Evansville, Indiana, but there was. And this is Curve, Rocket Ship to the Moon. Some real obscure shit tier crunkcore. Very advanced stuff. The Midwest is wild, it's true.
Oh my God.
Look, there's what's his name? Jay from Dropping a Pop Locket with the guy from Curve. Imagine you're at the Walmart in Evansville, Indiana, or whatever this is. You go down the aisle trying to find some wrapping paper for your niece's birthday party, and you see these two. You're like, what's going on here? Who are these creatures? How did they find their way into Walmart in Evansville, Indiana? I'm pretty sure this is literally Walmart in Evansville, Indiana. This is what you do. If you're a crunkcore artist in 2009 in Evansville, where else are you going to shoot your video but the lobby of Walmart? This is like the bank at Walmart, I think. And this, I forget this guy's name, but he was the other guy in Curve. Imagine you're the neighbors. You're like, the kids across the street are making another one of their videos. Look at this fit.
And it actually got
like,
big.
It was rare when you'd see like a scene kid in the wild like this, but this is the Midwest scene kid. He's got his like puffy white shoes here. He's got the plaid shorts.
Kid in the wild.
And, you know, the brightly colored like DGK shirt or something like that. The plaid shorts is how you know that you're in Indiana. That's how you know.
Plaid shorts.
But in all seriousness, though, I think he was like 17 or something and he did this. This is actually like, it's legitimately pretty good for like something a 17-year-old made in his like bedroom in Evansville, Indiana in 2008. It's actually pretty catchy. In all seriousness, I actually thought this was cool because it was like very DIY and punk in its own way. You know what I mean? Like, this is just kids from the middle of nowhere making music without having any concept of like what the rules were or anything like that. And like, I genuinely think it's cool. You know, is it good? Well, no, it's terrible.
Yeah.
But I think it's cool that they just were like doing, you know, just being creative, doing what they could with what they had and where they were. I think it's cool. I like it. It's terrible, but I actually think it's cool. Now, in my opinion, the real kings of crunkcore songs exist, and you'll understand why in a minute. If you recall, they blew up on MySpace back in 2004, 2005, something like that. They were the first band on MySpace Records. They were #1 on MySpace for a while before they were signed and stuff. You know, they've sort of turned into like a new metal-y butt rock band now. But real scene kids will remember their very early songs, which are peak crunkcore. And you'll understand after you see the lyrics, you will understand why they don't want you to remember these songs anymore. I think this shit slaps. I do. This is Dead in Ditches by Hollywood Undead. Oh, there it is. There it is. Right at the beginning.
But this is very crunky.
What a chorus. He wants me to hit a bong and get hard. Hey, listen, back then, that's just how we rolled. Yeah, you know, back then, the F word, you know, the F word, yeah, it was a different time. That's all I have to say. I'd like to know. I'd like to go see him and say, hey, do you guys still play Dead in Ditches or no? The other thing you may know them for is starting the career of a young influencer named Jeffree Star. Once again, you know, you may know Jeffree Star for being friends with Kylie Jenner or whatever and starting a multi-million-dollar makeup company. But I remember Jeffree Star for having a song with Hollywood Undead where he talks about sucking your boyfriend's dick.
It's so weird hearing like, it's very weird hearing a song that you watched be made and involved yourself in. It's so fucking weird. Like I smell Aaron's room when I hear this song. Like, it's so weird. Like I literally remember the look on Jeffree Star's face when he was recording this shit. Like, I was sitting there, like, it was hilarious. I was just like, oh my God, we were dying. Aaron was just like, oh. But when we put this song up, we got like that day, I think we got 4,000 followers on MySpace, which was very hard to do. 4,000 you can get all day these days, but back in the day on MySpace, that was not easy. But Jeffree Star, you know, was huge. We were doing well before he came along, but once he came along, it was like rocket ship. Hey, that's me. That's funny. They leave me off this in this song. I'm all through this song.
Hey, listen, it was another time. All I'm saying is, people, if you want to go deep down the scene music iceberg, you got to go back to the Hollywood Undead demos. I like the first album. Swan Songs, I think, is really good. I don't like any of their other stuff, but the demos that you can only get on MySpace, that's the real top tier shit. So go back and check out Dead in Ditches, the Jeffree Star songs, where they're talking about mad boobies, clean boobies, mean boobies. That's the real Hollywood Undead. If you want to go deep, deep down the scene music iceberg. Now, another flavor of
My Black Dahlia
scene music that I found very interesting was neon pop punk. The most famous example of that being Metro Station.
But anyway, yeah, big deuce, big 80-pound deuce. All right, well, that's it. Catch you guys later. Peace. Uncle Shady out.